there. I'm here. This work is not only mine, but Luiz Falcão as well. Falcão didn't came here. So as Kel asked me, I will give you a short presentation about Luiz Falcão. That is important as well. Luiz Falcão is a LARP independent researcher, is one of the main names in LARP in Brazil, and we talk on a daily basis about designing and studying and stuff. So, how this work came to us? After reading role-playing studies, transmedia foundations, we begin to discuss about how is Brazil in that book. We have Ian Rezende's work in that book, and mention about Augustus Boal's work. That's nice, has a predecessor for LARP. And in two different situations, the book has citation about how strong the Brazilian scenes are of role-playing, Brazilian scenes of role-playing games, specifically tabletop role-playing games. So at that point, me and Falcão began to discuss, okay, they're saying that we have a strong Brazilian tradition. Okay. But we ourselves are not quite sure about that. We don't have any documentation. We think that we have a strong scene, but we don't know that for sure. We're talking with William White just a minute ago. On the reviewing process of that work, the lack of confirmation was one of the reviewers think. And that's the reason why we have to do it through the Brazilian scene and to abroad. How can we dialogue with another countries without we ourselves don't knowing that much? So that's part of the history of analog role-playing games in Brazil. We begin with exchange students bringing that to Brazil in the 70s and the 80s, and we have some niches like English schools, universities, and elite high schools, and the tabletop role-playing games existed strictly in that places until the 90s. The distribution was a thing. Until there, in the 90s, too, most of the role-playing games are photocopies in Brazil. We call it in Brazil Xerox generation. Okay? So, in the 90s, in the early 90s, we begin to have our first translation and national productions of role-playing games. Here's some examples. And already in the early 90s, we have to have these meetings. This is international meeting of role-playing games, Encontro Internacional de RPG in Portuguese. That at some point of the 90s has become the second largest meeting of role-playing games in the world, losing from GameCon. In the mid-90s, we have some expansion in the scene. We have some the Vampire the Masquerade explosion in Brazil. And together with the explosion, we have several new titles, national titles and translations as well. And this is when the thing becomes a little tricky and interesting. newsstands has a central importance in Brazilian scene. Role-playing games in Brazil during the 90s and in the 20s exist in newsstands. Newspaper, role-playing games, newspaper. That's the thing. Because it's cheaper, because it's accessible in many ways and stuff. And then is when LARP came to Brazil. This is on your left are the first LARP as we know it in 1994 in a city called Curitiba. We're going to the end of the 90s on the right side with the first Confraria das Ideias LARP. Confraria das Ideias is an NGO that works specifically with LARP since 1998 or 99 or 1999. I don't remember it. In 2000, we have our own Satanic Panic with, well, you know Satanic Panic, right? We have our own in the 2000s, 20 years later, okay. And at that point, the Brazilian market of tabletop specifically has a nuance that's interesting. Because of the Satanic Panic, many role-playing game titles cease to exist. At the same point, Dungeons and Dragons on this third edition explodes all expectations and became mainly the only role-playing games on the 2000. And in 2010, we begin to work with the language more. The indie role-playing game scene became a thing in Brazil, as well as our LARP experimentations with, on the photo is Luiz Falcão. Luiz Falcão looking to here, to the Nordic countries and bringing that technology of LARPs to Brazil to experiment on that there. So that's the historical part. And we have another issue. How is research about role-playing games in Brazil? To my surprise, I don't know that number until I don't have a slightest clue about the number until I have the research. I think Brazil will have, I don't know, 100, maybe 200 scholars at maximum. We have 906 scholars who say that at some point of their studies, they studied role-playing games. Almost 400 has a PhD. That's an interesting number. But we don't know each other. We don't know. I'm knowing him today as an example. Okay, we don't know each other at all. What we know is with role-playing research in Brazil begins in the 1990s. At 2002, we just have conference about role-playing games and education. And education is the main issue in Brazilian researches. We have a strong tradition in education. I remember I first read it, not from Brazilian. I think it's a Whitney Beltran's paper that says about the strong Brazilian tradition in education. I read it. We have it. Then I will go to search it. Okay, that's the whole idea. And the educational research has some kind of a formula in Brazil. is the use of role-playing games as a tool in the teaching of whatever. So, ending the idea, we have lack of dialogue between researchers. That's one thing about Brazil. All the time we are in the reinvention of the wheel. All researchers begin from the zero because we don't talk with each other. That's an issue. And most of the researchers uses role-playing game as an object, not as a team. We are looking to role-playing games to prove some theory or some aspect and stuff. And in the practice, we're kind of like everywhere else, except for the distribution particularities. The distribution in Brazil was a thing. And in academia, we are eager to discuss abroad, but the truth is we barely talk to ourselves. That's an issue that research came to surface. And that's it. Thank you.